This is Deep Blue, where we get the true life stories of BYU athletes, coaches, and fans. Here's your host, Jarom Jordan.
On today's show, we talk to a man who played rugby at BYU, went on to make a World Cup roster for the United States. He's now the CEO of a professional rugby team in Utah, which he says he wants to make the epicenter of rugby in North America. His name is Kimball Kjar. What's up, Kimball?
Hey, how are you? Good to have you here.
I'm great. So your last name often gets mispronounced. Kjar, just constantly. How many people get it right off the bat?
Very few. Well, actually, it's kind of funny and ironic that I live in Draper and my kids go to Corner Canyon High School. So luckily, my kids are saved all of the embarrassment of having to tell everybody how to pronounce their name because they know who Coach Eric Kjar is because he's won all those.
Zach Wilson now.
Basically Zach Wilson.
Yeah, and Jackson Dart and many others, right?
They've got that thing rolling. But, growing up, even when I was here at BYU, I was known as Kjar, all sorts of different nicknames. But, it's very rarely pronounced correctly off the first bat.
Okay, you and I met, I think, in probably 2008. All of my roommates played on the rugby team. Yep. Steve St. Pierre, Derek and Mike Smith, Manti Sua, Tim Steflik, a bunch of those guys. Then later, Dylan Libba and Sean Davies and Ray Forster and these guys. So that was my connection I'm just the roommate there. Then BYUtv said, hey, 9 and 10, we're going to broadcast some games. So we did, I think, 3 games.
Yep.
And at the time, that was the first
live national broadcast of
college rugby.
That
was pretty cool.
BYUtv, yeah.
You were an assistant coach, and I was like, this guy seems cool. At the time, you had brown hair. Now you have gray hair because you've become a CEO of a rugby team. So it's been this long journey, which we will explore. So let's dive back to how you even got into rugby. You show up at BYU. You're here to wrestle?
Yeah.
And then the program gets cut? Is that how it begins?
It was before it got cut, but I was coming down to BYU to wrestle, yes. It goes back a little bit further. I guess this is your long-form format, so I can go into the long story.
We have time.
So I was actually big into wrestling, big into football in high school, did a little bit of track and field, and I actually had a number of friends in high school that played rugby up at one of 2 clubs. There was one up in Davis County aptly called the Davis Rugby Club, and then there was obviously Highland Rugby. And I had a couple friends from Bountiful that were playing at both of those, and a handful of times they were like, you should come out and play rugby. You'd love rugby. You should come out and play. And I'd be like, I think it'd be really cool, but I've got wrestling and I've got all these other things that I was doing. Mostly wrestling because freestyle and Greco seasons typically run kind of in that April, May, June time frame. So that's when high school rugby here in Utah typically is. Anyways, never had the chance, but it kind of stuck with me that would be pretty fun to be able to go do and play. Anyways, fast forward, after my senior year in high school, I was coming down here to BYU to wrestle.
On scholarship?
No, I was doing one of those kind of preferred walk-on things, and candidly, it was kind of like I really like wrestling, but to be a wrestler at the university level, at the collegiate level, you've got to have a couple screws loose or just be completely passionate. Like, honestly, it's either end of the spectrum. There's really nothing in between.
I've seen Foxcatcher.
Yeah, well, there's that, and then there's just the whole it's just cutting of the weight thing, and they basically train twice a day, 6 days a week, and
sounds super fun.
Yeah. Not really, especially, as you're coming into college, you kind of want to have a fun college experience as best we can here at good old BYU, right? So I told my family, my dad, who's he actually wrestled down here at BYU. He was on scholarship. So wrestling's kind of big in our family. And I told him, I said, Dad, I don't think I want to wrestle anymore. I'm kind of done. And he was supportive. Anyways, fast forward to when I'm sitting here at in the old Heritage Halls with my roommates, and one of my roommates is good old Professor Taylor Nadal over here in the BYU Business School.
Is that Justin's brother?
That's Justin's brother.
Okay.
But, shout out to the Nadal family. They're the ones that I can blame for all this chaos. But Taylor, who was my roommate, he ended up playing rugby as well and ended up being an All-American U.S. Eagle as well. But he said, you should go try out for the rugby team, because I was kind of telling him, like, I want to do something here at BYU. I'm too small to be on the football team. I'm too small to, do anything else.
What's your height and weight at this point?
I was 5'9", probably 185, 190, so.
That just screams scrum half.
Yeah, well, it does for rugby, but, back then I was like, in high school I played DB and receiver, and I was decent. I wasn't like super fast.
Where'd you go to high school again?
Bountiful High. Bountiful High, yeah. So I was okay. I didn't get really recruited to go play football anywhere. Not even, the lowliest of lowliest teams were really concerned for, to have a little hobbit come and play for them. But anyways, I wanted to do something other than intramural sports where, you're going to pray with the other team before you get sunk into the game itself. So rugby, he said, you should go try out for the rugby team. My brothers had played. His older brother, Lincoln, his older brother, Justin, had all played, and James. So he had 3 older brothers that had played rugby here down at BYU, and they loved the experience. And I said, yeah, I'll go give it a whack. And because I was just in such good shape from wrestling, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I didn't know that there was an offsides line. I didn't know. I didn't know that there were certain things you could do at a ruck versus other things. I didn't know what a scrum was versus a lineout was, but I could run sideline to sideline for 80 minutes, and if it had a ball, I could tackle it, and that's really all I really knew. Anyways, made the team. Yeah, kind of the rest is history from there. But yeah, it was kind of happenstance that. Rugby kind of got introduced, but at the same time, I'd kind of been thinking about it from my high school days.
Okay, you said, and then it happened. Well, how quickly did it happen? Because you became a 3-time All-American, and then in 2003, you find yourself on the USA World Cup roster.
Yeah.
So how quickly did you become pretty good at it?
Well, that's kind of the next leg of the story, which is, I guess, again, we're kind of in long form here. So I made the team, and it was an amazing experience because we got to travel, and this was back in the day when we used to actually stay with LDS family members. Like, they'd put us up in their homes, and one of the families we were staying with, this guy owned all of these family fun centers, and we got dropped off at one of them, and he came out with like a 5-gallon bucket of tokens, and we just went to town on the arcades and the mini putt, and I mean just the way that being a part of the BYU and the LDS community and how we were received, even though we weren't an athletic department program, we still wore the logo on our chest, and we still tried to represent the university with pride. So people resonate with that. So it was fun. It was exciting. I was traveling the country with these guys that were all returned missionaries. Some of them were married. There's so many guys that I could name, but one of them that kind of stood out was a guy by the name of Pete Mon. He's a neurosurgeon here now locally, and he was the one that actually taught me that there was an offsides line in the game, and that there was certain rules and boundaries that you had to kind of play within. And guys like Romaine Marshall, Eric O, and the list could go on and on. We played with Henry Bloomfield after he was done with his football stuff, and that freshman year was such an enjoyable experience, learning the game, traveling around the U.S., and being able to represent BYU, which was a school that I had grown up just idolizing from my younger football days. It was really fun. So that got me really excited. But really, what ended up being the nail that sealed the coffin, or kind of sealed my fate, so to speak, was I got my mission call, and of all places, they sent me to Australia. And now, listen, rugby is a big sport there, but it's not like the biggest. People think that rugby is just, what you do. Like, there's kangaroos and crocodiles walking down the street.
And rugby balls.
Yeah, and rugby, stuff.
There's Aussie rules football. So
there's Aussie, there's Aussie rules. There's cricket. There's all sorts of other sports. But, rugby is a big sport, and it's huge, no doubt. But to go and then kind of live in a country where rugby was a part of the culture, and you saw what rugby is and was as a community and as a community builder and a culture builder, and what it could do to unite families and people, because rugby is kind of unique. Maybe we can talk about that later, but it is a sport that, no matter where I go in the world, I'm welcomed. And, to see that in action, I just fell in love with it. And, I knew that was going to kind of be my fate. Anyways, we played touch rugby.
And you're like, hey, you're offside at this point.
That's right. Well, I have to make sure as well that we played touch rugby instead of just touch, but we played touch rugby on my mission on our P days. I was in one area my entire mission for the most part because I was in this Mandarin-speaking program. So
you speak Mandarin? I didn't know this.
Dian. That's it. That's all I remember.
That's all you remember?
That's it. Don't ask me to start having one-on-one conversations here. But we were supposed to go over there and teach in Mandarin, and I picked it up to the point where at the end of my mission I could have a gospel conversation. But for the most part, it was dare I say, pick up lines at the bus stop.
I always say that too. People go, oh, so you're fluent in Portuguese. I went to Brazil.
Yeah.
I go, well, yes and no.
Yeah.
I'm fluent in church speak.
Yeah.
Not general speak.
Back then, if someone started talking to me about, geopolitical business affairs of China and anything else.
I can barely do that in English.
I just tell them, listen, can we talk? And most people that were there, they wanted to speak English anyways because they're in Australia.
Yeah.
But the key thing there is that we didn't ever leave. Like, we were in the same area for 21 – I was in the same area for 21 months of the 24 months.
Wow.
I was on my mission. Yeah.
That's rare. For those who don't know, you typically move every 6 to 12 weeks.
Yeah.
So that was either awesome or a punishment.
Well, and I was with, 3 missionaries, 3 elders for that same amount of time. And
wow.
You couldn't have picked 4 more divergent personalities to be with, and love them to death this day. But I think 2 years was enough for all of us. So I think we keep in touch. But
it's a long time.
Yeah. But so the thing that we decided to do was, we're not just going to play basketball or go. We're going to do something fun and different and enjoy the culture and the community. So most P days we would end up at Sunnybank Hills Rugby Club right there in Brisbane, and the zone in the area knew that was kind of a standing tradition, and then the members in the area would come out and play as well, and they'd bring friends. It was one of those things that was kind of a proselyting tool as well. But we'd go play touch and got to practice my rugby.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. So it was fun. Came back, having spent 2 years playing touch rugby every week, and having learned a little bit more about the culture, interacted with some of the Polynesian community, the Kiwis from New Zealand, and everyone in between, and kind of that expat vibe, and I came back to BYU. We started to kind of help get the program going, and it was already pretty well established at that phase, but we were really gung-ho on trying to, be able to play in that national championship, which we hadn't ever played in since like the early 80s because it was played on Sunday. And really where my inflection, the next kind of big inflection point was we played a game down at Cal against the vaunted, California Berkeley Bears. And they had won, I think, at that point, 16 of the last 17 national championships. And that was, 2001. Got recognized by Jack Clark, who was the general manager, and Tom Billups, who was on the U.S. team coaching staff, and got selected that summer to go play with the U.S. national team, and off we went. So,
off you go to the 2003 World Cup as well.
So yeah,
where was that held?
That was back in Australia.
You're back.
Yeah. Some interesting stories there I could kind of tell you a little bit about. But, yeah, I played with the U.S. national team from 2001 till about 2007 when I was kind of deselected and asked to quietly, ride off into the sunset. But great experiences, all 6-7 years. Did
you ever think, hey, I'm going to be on a World Cup roster?
I wanted to.
That's like pretty gnarly, man.
I mean, obviously jumping into the deep end of the pool in 2001, I didn't know my head from my tail. I was still.
You go from not knowing offside to being on the USA.
Yeah. So let's see. So my freshman year was 96, 97. Went on my mission 97, 99. Came back kind of in that late 99. I was back in school. So really my first year of really playing scrum half, which was kind of my key position with the U.S. national team, was really 2000, 2001. So I'd really only been playing scrum half for about a year.
Oh, wow.
And
are you the third string on that roster? Or the backup?
Who did we have? I was kind of, if there is such a thing, I was kind of second and a half string. Mm-hmm. We had three of us, and the third was a guy by the name of Mose Timoteo. Great guy. There's Kevin Dalzell, myself, and then Mose Timoteo. And Mose was a Western Samoa-raised kid that lived here in the U.S., who had immigrated to the U.S. But he played kind of wing fullback and scrum half. So they kind of kept him as sort of their flex scrum half guy, but it was me and Kevin Dalzell for those 2 or 3 years there between 2001 2004. But 2003 was amazing going down and not only going back to Australia. We actually were in Brisbane. So you're there typically about 6 weeks for the World Cup. We were in Brisbane for the 2-week buildup before the actual competition started. So I was actually there, and we played 2 games in Brisbane. So I was there basically 3.5 weeks. And that was 2003. It was still relatively fresh after my mission, so I got to go back and see people and be a part of their lives. And some unique, special stories there.
So you end up graduating. You're off USA. You're done playing in 07-ish. You said?
Yeah, I was trying to get back on the. So I took 2004 off. Young family, needed to get a job. Rugby here in the U.S. wasn't professional at the time, and
it is now, which we'll get into.
It is, yeah. And so I was asked to go overseas, to sleep on couches, to play with these Division III, Division II teams, and then maybe I'd get a contract. And I wasn't really interested in doing that, so I took 2004 off. We just had our first child, and needed to be a little bit responsible, needed to grow up a little bit. Had just graduated from BYU as well. But 2005, 2006, I wanted to kind of make one last run at another World Cup in 2007, which was going to be in France. And was successfully making that run, and unfortunately, the coaching staff at the last minute, I had been kind of the number 1, number 2 scrum half that year. We were kind of switching back and forth between myself and this guy by the name of Chad Erskine. And right at the very end, just before they were going to announce the team to go to France, they dropped me. And I didn't even get a phone call from the head coach.
How'd you find out? From
one of my teammates, former University of Utah rugby guy, Blake Burdett. Mm. And, so imagine that, your former University of Utah buddy who I love to this day telling me that, oh, you didn't hear? Yeah, they didn't pick you. And, just kind of being gutted on the phone call.
And you're thinking you might be the starter, let alone
I thought
the team.
I thought at least
weird.
I had a chance.
Yeah,
I thought I had a chance to be the number 9 jersey. But no, that was an interesting experience. But I think that life works out the way that it's supposed to, and there's some things that occurred later that year that were more important for me to be home for than anything else. So, in hindsight, it was a little bit gutting, but at the same time, it was, dare I say, meant to be.
What were those things that it was important you were home for?
My wife's mom, she passed away from cancer. And had I been in France at the time with the U.S. national team, I wouldn't have been able to be there for my wife and my kids and to help in whatever way I could with that whole horrible experience. Her mom was pretty young. She was 51, passed away from lung cancer, of all things, non-smoker. But kind of a sad but important thing that I was able to be there for. And had I been in France, I wouldn't have been able to make it back in time to help because it just went, when she passed away, it just went really fast. So,
okay, you've always known you wanted to do what you're doing now. Let me manifest this in a quote that I found online. I asked Jeeves, and he told me this. Okay, you're 23. You did an interview with...
using your Netscape or your Net?
Yeah, it was Kimball Kjar at Juno.com. Wes Clark interviews you, and you said this. I also would like to see the progress of rugby in Utah, including high school rugby, as well as collegiate and men's club rugby. Did you know when you were 23, hey, I want to be the CEO of the Utah Warriors, who are going to be a founding club in Major League Rugby in 2018? Which we'll explore more in a moment, but I'm shocked at how much vision you had when you were still young to get to this point.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I began to realize after I got back from my mission what rugby here in Utah, but more, at the time I was really hyper focused on what BYU could become, because I knew that because of our expat community, the LDS community, and the resources and facilities and support that the school was giving here, even though it wasn't an NCAA sport, that this university could be dominant. And I was really focused on trying to help with that. But within that, I knew that rugby here in Utah was something that was very unique anywhere else that I had traveled, not only in the United States but in the world, because of the history that we had with the high school community, with the club rugby community, the collegiate community. I mean, even when I was playing, this was before BYU had won all those national championships that they went on to win.
You say that you were on the staff for the first several, which I want to explore in a second.
Yeah. But, rugby is pound for pound the most successful sport here in the state of Utah. And people don't really know it. That to me was kind of the sad thing, and that's maybe why I said what I said, or just kind of channeling my inner 23-year-old self. But I knew that rugby here in Utah, with the history of success that it already had, could really affect this community for good. We know what sports can do for communities, period. Anytime the Jazz are winning, everyone in the state wants to, they're going to shut down and go and watch. And that's great. Same thing with BYU. We've got these emotional, visceral connections to sport because of what it can do in terms of a sense of belonging and family and identity. We find meaning within sports in a lot of ways. There's something really existential there. Sorry to get a little bit, philosophical here.
No, amen to all that.
But rugby, as I've seen it in other countries and even here in the U.S., can take that connection to a completely different level.
Why is that?
there's a sense of belonging in rugby that you don't get with other sports. Just give you a kind of an example, and you know this, having kind of been involved, but a lot of people don't realize that after every match, both teams will get together and have dinner.
No other sport does it.
No other sport does that. You'd be hard-pressed to think that the Jazz are going to get together with the Clippers after their playoff games. Especially with all the stuff that we saw.
Pat Beverly and Rudy Gobert are going to break bread.
Yeah. No. Not going to happen.
No.
The coaches aren't going to get together and share a beer, right? That's what happens in rugby all the time. Every game. It's something that's instilled from the top international levels, with the All Blacks, the British and Irish Lions, the English teams, all the way down to the local high school and community teams. And some of the people that are my best friends in the rugby community are people that I actually played against, because you get to know these guys outside of the lines, and you get to understand kind of what their upbringing is, and to hear the story of how someone's living in Argentina and what it takes to just even get to the rugby club to train, to be able to do what they do. They're hopping on a bus for an hour and a half, and they're just getting done with maybe their day job, and they've got 4 small kids. But, just to hear that kind of stuff is just so sobering and brings you kind of back to earth. But you keep those connections, with not only the guys that you played with, but the people that you played against. And there's a sense of belonging in a family. And like I said earlier today, you can go to any rugby club in the world and you say, hey, listen, I'm a card-carrying member of the rugby family. I'll let you in. There's a lot of people that would just literally let you sleep on their couch, offer you food, give you some drinks, because that's what the rugby community is. It's just very welcoming and inclusive. It's one of the more inclusive rugby community or sports that I've ever been a part of. And what I think that can do for Utah is something that I get super excited about.
It's also awesome because it being the sport of rugby, I've never seen a sport that melds more cultures and languages. So when we're doing a game, with the Utah Warriors, I'm preparing to call names from South Africa, Wales, England, New Zealand, Australia,
why you're constantly
Fiji.
Bugging me for pronunciation, guys.
Hey, how do I say this guy's name? Samoa, Fiji, every state in the union, all Canada, all over the country. It is so cool to bring those guys together, and then they form what every team wishes they could, which is culture, unity, a oneness that the flow of rugby requires. The sport itself is beautiful. The people that play it are beautiful. It's so interesting. And I'm like you. I'm in the, hey, you need to learn about this sport still. A rugby missionary trying to preach the gospel of this, which it's been such a fun journey. And I'm lucky my roommates played rugby and that I got to be involved. And now we're seeing it grow in the state of Utah in an amazing way. But I want to go back to, leading up to the Warriors. So you're done playing. You are now an assistant coach for BYU. And now the program goes to a height it had not gone to before. 2005, they finally say, okay, we're not going to play the title game on Sunday. BYU's got a shot at the national championship now. 2005 doesn't go well. 2006, 7, 8. Cal dominates BYU.
Yeah.
Then in 2009, enough was enough, and BYU defeats Cal at Stanford on a night where I cried massive tears.
I'm still just sitting here getting chills while you talk about it, because that 2009 team was probably one of the highlights of my entire sporting life. Because, 2000, I finished in 2003. I think in 2004 was the first year that they got to go to the playoffs. And we didn't know our head from our tail on how to do it because it was a 2-day format. It was a Friday, Saturday. You had to play 2 games. And we didn't really have the depth. And, we were a good team, but, I think at that time the program hadn't gotten to where the foundation had been laid, but it wasn't there yet. We knew we had good teams, but it just hadn't gotten there yet. Anyways, 2004, I think they lost in the quarterfinals. The next year they lost, I think 2005, dare I say, I think that was the semifinal loss to Utah, which stung. My little brother was on that team. 2006, I think they played in the championship and lost. That was with Salesi Sika, who went on to play professionally in France and with the U.S. national team for years. Alapate Tuilavuka. We ended up with like half a dozen guys that played with the U.S. national team that came from that team. But they lost because they didn't know how to win just yet. 2007, I wasn't coach. I had just started coaching in the fall, but that year in the spring they had lost to Cal again. So there was like 3 or 4 years, and I remember the first time I was coaching was officially as an assistant coach was the spring of 2008. And I remember looking over at the Cal team and looking at our team, and we just lost Salesi Sika. We just lost Pate and some of these other kind of marquee players, but we somehow got ourselves back to the national championship. And we were just getting pummeled by this Cal team because their guys were just huge, massive dudes. It was like 63-10 with like 20 minutes to go. And Dave Smith, who was our head coach at the time, old Smitty, he had his glasses on, but he didn't really have good eyesight. He couldn't see the scoreboard. And he just looks over at me. He goes, Kjar. Kjar, how much time's left in the game? I'm like, 20 minutes, Smitty. Oh, my gracious. Yeah, that was kind of the low point, I think, of where we're at. But, like I said, everything had the foundation had been built, and we had kind of built up this rivalry with Cal that we were going to keep pressing them. We were going to keep pushing them to try to continue to defend their title. 2009 rolls around, and we end up with tons of just committed, hardworking guys like your roommate, Steve St. Pierre.
The captain.
Yeah. Paul Lasike, who's now playing professionally for the Harlequins that just won the Premiership in England this last year. Who, by the way, he'll be to the game on Saturday.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome.
He's going to be the alumni flag bearer.
Yeah, there were a bunch of pros in Major League Rugby eventually on that team too.
On that team, yeah. So
cool.
I know Josh and Jared. That was their freshman year. Josh and Jared Whippy.
Kyle Sumption's freshman year.
Kyle Sumption. He was like Jordan Lowry. He ended up playing with New England for a year.
Now a TB12
guy, he's a trainer for Tom Brady's group.
Dan Paul played for Houston.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Sean
really
Davies,
good guys on
course.
that team, but we were still boxing above our weight.
Yeah,
and that 2009 team was nothing short of amazing. And
08 was 59-7, just for reference.
Okay. Yeah, whatever it was.
2009. So you just get pummeled, and then I saw it firsthand. These guys were fed up, man.
Yeah.
And so going into 2009, all the chips were in on we got to win this.
And we had other guys like Manti Sua, who the day before. It was Dan Paul who had broken his jaw, and Manti who I think had
fractured his orbital bone.
Yeah, that's right. Was it Manti who fractured his orbital bone? Okay. Dan Paul had fractured his jaw the day before.
Yes, the two starting wingers, right?
Yeah, so we were down kind of our two main guys on the edge, and so it was like, forget it. We're just going to throw everything at these guys as we possibly can. We ended up, I think, even with like 3 yellow cards, which means, for those who don't know, like you end up with a guy kind of in the what we call the sin bin, or kind of use that.
Great name.
You end up with guys off the field, so you're playing with less players on the field. We ended up with 3 yellow cards against Cal, and our guys just kept battling, and they came back late kick to seal the win, and yeah, it was amazing.
25-22 at Stanford against Cal.
Yep.
You finally do it. BYU has finally done it.
Yep.
They got to the top of the mountain. You were hoping it happened when you were a player, but it took, being a coach. And then BYU goes on a run. BYU goes on a run where, the next couple of years there's some natties there. Mm-hmm. And Johnny Linehan comes in, Johnny Rugby, and the Whippies, and it's a great group. It's a great group, and it's an amazing legacy. And BYU fans generally are super proud of that team. Absolutely.
Well, I remember because we were 2009, And listen, I respect the athletic department, everything that they have ever done to help the BYU rugby team, and both the men's and the women's. The women's started soon thereafter, I think in 2010.
And they won the national championship in 2019.
Yeah, and they've got one of their former players that's an Olympian, Jordan Gray, formerly known as.
She's great.
So they've got an Olympian that comes from that women's rugby team. But it's kind of interesting and ironic because as BYU fans, as long as we've got the logo on our chest and we're representing the school the way that we should, the fans show up. And there were a couple of those games that we played at Rio Tinto against Cal, against Arkansas State, and we had 12,000, 13,000 people. And those were mostly all BYU fans. And we didn't have like marketing support. It was a club team. Like I was helping with like the social media and the website and some of the, we were all kind of like doing stuff to help the program kind of look and feel like to represent BYU the way that we knew it should. But the community came out and did great. I remember Tom Homo mentioning to us that he was getting emails and phone calls and texts saying congratulations on the national championship. But
and for those who don't know, Tom has nothing to do with the clubs.
Correct.
Yeah,
correct.
They're
supportive, but they can't for Title IX reasons and for other reasons.
Physically involved.
They can't. One of the boundaries, unfortunately, that we had was like after that 2009 win, they wanted to display the trophy in the student athlete building in the Legends Hall or whatever it is. But up on the third floor in a trophy case that was kind of in the corner and out of the way, not to be ungrateful, but just to kind of give people context, it was going to be a trophy case that probably not even anyone within the athletic department knew it was going to be there. But for compliance and other concerns, for Title IX perception and other things, they decided that they couldn't do that because they didn't want the NCAA to come down. And we appreciated the support regardless and nonetheless, but they can and can't do certain things, even though it was as they saw and we saw, kind of somewhat innocuous to just put a trophy in the corner out of the way that no one really was going to ever really see. But, there's always going to be situations like that with the NCAA being involved. But anyways.
To put a bow on the awesomeness of 2009, after 2008, there were members of the team who didn't take home their medals from that game for second place.
In 2008.
They left them on the field. They didn't care. In fact, we had a washer and dryer in this house tucked away in the corner. And on top of it, for a long time, I thought what I saw and had whatever on it, strewn random clothes, was like a dinner plate. No, it was the second place trophy from the 2008 national championship game against Cal. I pulled it out one day and I was like, what is this? Yeah. These guys do not care about second. They could care less. They're going all for it. Yeah. So that was pretty impressive.
2009, those guys literally and truly, if the metaphor they had burned the boats. They had burned the boats completely, and they were like, we're done. So that team is always going to stand out to me. But, listen, there were so many other good teams and guys that I had the fortune of coaching and working with, and to see what they're doing now with their families, that's a very gratifying. That's the one thing that I told my wife, because it was an unpaid volunteer thing. That it was my kind of charitable work to be able to kind of feel like I'm helping these young men be able to achieve what they could achieve, and that's been very rewarding even to this day.
Okay, so you finished with BYU. How do you get involved in helping found the Utah Warriors, a Major League Rugby club? And the context of domestic leagues in the United States is not good. It's one and done. 1 year, done, didn't work. Major League Rugby right now is in its fourth year. It's working. The Warriors were one of the first 7 teams. We're up to 12 teams. We'll get to at least 13 next year. It's growing. How did this start, and how did you get involved? Because now it's this 23-year-old's vision coming to fruition of we got a team in Utah in a league that is sticking.
Yeah. Oh, shoot, happenstance, luck, just weird, all sorts of different things kind of coalesced for me to be sitting in this chair and to be a part of this. I mean, I was gainfully employed, had a good business, was working with some business partners on a couple different things, and things were going relatively well. We had just kind of come out of that whole Great Recession stuff, and things were going pretty good. Life was great, young family. But, you kind of pointed out there was another league that started called Pro Rugby, PRO, Professional Rugby Organization. They called it Pro Rugby. They got sanctioning to be a professional league here in the U.S. in 2016, I believe. They started with 5 teams. In fact, a couple of our former BYU guys played on some of those teams, Kyle Sumption, Sean Davies, among a few others, I believe. And it didn't go anywhere. So I at that time, I was kind of working with, in 2014 and 15, I was still working with USA Rugby as the former international athlete on their board. And I was kind of helping out with some of that sort of stuff and working with a couple other different stakeholders. I was also helping with, we'd help put together the Varsity Cup, and I was helping manage some of those elements. So I was trying to help move the game along as I thought would be good. Anyways, we all realized and saw that the way that this league, this pro rugby group was set up, wasn't going to be able to stand the test of time. Because if you go back and you look at any professional sports league here in the United States, no league has been able to stay on its own 2 feet as long as it's got one monolithic owner. Meaning that, if there's one guy just owning all the teams, it's not going to be able to – it's not going to scale. It's not going to be sustainable. Why? Well, you saw it with the AAFL. You even saw it with the XFL. If it doesn't end up working to the level that individual needs or wants – financially, it's just going to end up not making sense for them, because they're going to end up saying, "Oh, I just stroked millions and millions of dollars to try to make this thing work, and I don't really have much to show for it." And what people don't really understand is that, professional sports don't make lots of money. I mean, there's lots of money going through them, but you don't make a lot. Even the NFL and the NBA, you're not making tons and tons of money. Because whatever you do make, you're going to end up plowing back into fan experience or bigger contracts for players, or you're going to facilities, whatever it is. It's the same thing with the athletic departments in universities. They don't make lots of money, but they do end up creating brand prestige and community engagement and university identity and fandom connections, that kind of stuff. But sports is candidly, it's not making tons and tons of money. So these monolithic owners those models don't work. We knew that it was going to fail. And so a handful of us that were looking at this and watching this, we said, okay, rugby is going to be professional here within the United States at some point. It just is. The U.S. is the last market, the last major sports market that does not have any type of professionalized rugby. World Rugby wants it to professionalize in the U.S. because they stand to gain oodles, financially and otherwise. They want the U.S., they want Canada, they want the Western Hemisphere to kind of grow up to its potential rugby-wise. So we knew that there was going to be an interest and a need to do that. We began to kind of collate some of these like-minded groups and individuals. And that's when we began to formulate the construct of Major League Rugby. At the time, it was called Major Rugby Championship, placeholder name at the time. But the biggest thing that we knew needed to happen was, first and foremost, the business model needed to be sound enough to be able to weather the storms that were going to come its way financially and otherwise.
And you totally knew there'd be a pandemic coming.
We saw that.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, we saw that. Well, I mean, listen, yeah, that this model, what we call the single entity model, is the same model that Major League Soccer used. It's basically a partnership model. Instead of other professional leagues, you have a single entity, and then they franchise out regions and geographies. We're not necessarily technically a franchise. We're a partner within Major League Rugby. Real Salt Lake is a partner within Major League Soccer. And so you stand to share and benefit, but you all have equal say and equal rights as to what the overall entity can and can't do. It was the model because of that we felt would be sustainable and scalable, because Major League Soccer, people forget, Major League Soccer was 10 years into their life, and people didn't know if they were going to exist. 2004, 2005, there was kind of a reckoning as to whether or not they were going to still be around. And that's when Real Salt Lake came in, Dave Checketts, Dean Howes, that group came into being, and that kind of kicked off the first expansion of everything Major League Soccer. Anyways.
Now it's massive.
Now it's crazy. I mean, you've got the Carolinas with forgetting his name right now, the big hedge fund manager, paid $325 million for his membership rights into Major League Soccer. To
be clear, if someone wants to buy the Utah Warriors for $325 million, you will listen.
We'll have a conversation. Yeah, we'll definitely have that conversation. I think RSL, their membership was like 14 or 15 million in 2004. The Carolina team was purchased in 2019 for $325 million.
Not bad.
Decent appreciation.
Mm-hmm. It's like a house in Utah.
Just a little bit, yeah, within the last month. So we put together this construct, the kind of the basic, identity of what we're trying to do. And, we ended up with a handful of folks that were ready to put together this partnership. We ended up with 7 teams in 2018. That quickly grew to 12 in 2019. We stayed at 12 for 2000. Even though we were at 13 members, we stayed at 12 teams in 2020. We have 12 teams again this year, again 13 members. Dallas will be the 13th team this next season in 2022. And there's plenty of other good, positive conversations going on in other geographies for expansion. So, yeah, that's kind of the gist.
Let's talk about Utah specifically. So I am also the play-by-play broadcaster and a host of a weekly show with the Utah Warriors. Yep. Full disclosure. So I am a massive fan, obviously, of what's going on with this. You called me in 2018 and said, hey, we've started a league and a team, and do you want to broadcast again? I was like, yeah, man, rugby. I haven't done this in...
Did I sound that sort of like diminutive?
Yeah. 8 year before we had done the game, so I hadn't called any in a minute, but this has been awesome. So here we are in year 4, and, July 10th, you had a celebration of rugby.
Yep.
And it was so cool. And we talked after about, man, this has not happened, where you had the national champions from Utah this year in high school rugby. Harriman won the high school national championship. Harriman was there. Some alums from Highland, of course. United, who have made a massive splash in that space. Obviously, BYU in Utah and other colleges around. And, of course, the Utah Warriors and others. It was super cool to see that. When you say the epicenter of rugby, and you say Utah's really good at rugby as a state. Mm-hmm. Oh, my gosh, yeah. And they were all in the field together, and that was a pretty special moment that kind of gives us a glimpse into, obviously, the past, but also into the future of what can happen here with that vision.
Yeah, I mean, like I think some of my MLR partners, they get it's kind of like fingernails on a chalkboard.
when I say,
listen, Utah, I believe, genuinely can and should be the epicenter of North American rugby.
Is this mainly because of the Polynesian influence? Or is that partly?
That's a big influence, and that was kind of all part of that whole, on-watch celebration of rugby, was acknowledging that, the city of Iosepa and the origins of the Polynesian community here in Utah. And, we have the second largest Polynesian population base outside of Polynesia. here in Utah.
You're saying outside of those actual countries?
Outside of those actual countries.
So number one state.
Auckland, New Zealand is the biggest population base for the Polynesian community outside of Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, all the Polynesian countries. Utah's next. We have the largest Polynesian population base outside of Polynesia. And because of that, we have a very unique cultural, foundation there. But even more so, because of call it the LDS Church influence and the expat community that kind of got tied into emigrating to Utah and kind of building this sort of ecosystem of the crossroads of the West, dare I say, crossroads of the world. You have so many people that came here. Like BYU rugby started in the mid '60s from a guy by the name of John Sager. He grew up in England and New Zealand and South Africa, and quickly, he had other guys that were coming from those countries that wanted to be a part of it, and then they taught their American friends, and then their American friends went out and taught. So it's got all these ties for decades here in Utah. In fact, people were playing rugby, the rugby code of football here at BYU just at the turn of the century. So there's a lot of that stuff that historically is a part of our history. People just don't know it. But yeah, I mean, listen, the championships that Highland Rugby, United, BYU, Utah, there's so much success that's here in the state of Utah that it doesn't even compare, doesn't even get close to comparing for any other state in the United States. Across the board, and because of the recognition that the sport has been given, and you've got Olympians, you've got national team members, men and women. It just doesn't. There's really no other state that has the capability of saying we've got so much success, and we're going to build on this success by hopefully building that pinnacle on top, which is really what we. As I see as the Warriors, is helping to provide that aspirational, pinnacle for athletes.
So now you've got a team that in its fourth year has made the playoffs for the second time, is having the best year of the 4 years, has become the comeback kings and has won a bunch of games in the last 5 minutes. It's been incredible. Has clinched a playoff spot and will play here coming up on July 25th against the LA Guiltinis in the LA Coliseum.
Yep.
How have you felt about the success of this season and what you've been able to build with a team that is unique compared to many of its peers in the league, in the composition of the team?
Yeah. I'm going to use a rugby word here, but I'm chuffed.
I don't know what that means. What's chuffed mean?
It's excited.
Excited?
It's the very Commonwealth word of I'm just so chuffed. To think of like where this team has come from, and like 2019 is a year that I think everyone within the Warriors organization would just soon forget. It was 2 wins, 12 losses, and 2 ties, and 12 of those losses, were just almost identical to some, but on the losing side of some of the games that we've had this year on the winning side, where we were there, but we just couldn't quite close it out for whatever reason. And to see the progress that has been made, even in 2020 with just the 5 games that we had, to see the progress that's taken place. And with the dedication of our players, the ones that have been here from day one, like guys like Lance Williams, Saya Uhila, Angus McClellan's going to be getting his 50th cap at the LA game on the 25th, not this weekend, not version 1.0 of the Guiltinis games. To see guys that are going to get those types of benchmarks and it's super rewarding to see them be able to finally get their just desserts, especially those guys, because they've been through a lot. Guys like Josh Whippy, Jared Whippy, both those guys had
BYU alums, you mentioned.
BYU alums. Both of them sadly had the exact same double tib fib fracture occur in 2018. Josh has fought his way back. Jared has had a little bit of a longer road to recovery, but to see them finally, living up to their potential, guys like Calvin Whiting, who's a former BYU rugby guy, get called up to the U.S. national team because he's been playing so well within this infrastructure. To have guys like Sean Davies, who was a part of that 2009 national team, to be able to be one of our assistant coaches, and probably between you, me, and the gatepost is probably one of the brightest and most young, up-and-coming coaches that we have in the United States. I mean, really, just to see that and how we've committed ourselves as an organization to developing domestic talent and being a part of building this pathway. Because here in Utah, like I was saying, there's so much rugby success, not only with the Polynesian community, but with the high school and the colleges. One of our current players, Logan Tago, for example, fans might not be, very well aware of him, but he played this last weekend. He came off the bench against Atlanta. He's 6'4", 225 pounds, former D1 football defensive lineman.
Where was he? Washington State? Right?
Washington State. Grew up in American Samoa. Played quite a bit of rugby there, but because of the American influence, played a lot of football, and got a Division I scholarship. Played, kicked around in the NFL for a little while. Was actually contracted in the XF or in the Canadian Football League last year before it shut down due to COVID. And we were hosting a touch rugby tournament on the fields next to the stadium, and we just see this guy just galloping, running like a gazelle, just moving like no other human being could move. And his ball handling skills were really solid, and his size and his power and his speed. Granted, he was playing, a bunch of washed up has-beens like me, but at the same time, you could tell that guy had skills. A similar thing with a guy by the name of Joe Mano. He was playing in the local men's club stuff here in Utah, but never really been given a shot within Major League Rugby. We gave him a shot. He was one of our leading try scorers before he tore his ACL this year. And he's probably, if he can recover and get back, he's probably going to be he's probably going to be getting interest from bigger clubs in Europe within the next couple of years. He's that good. And those are guys that are just kind of growing like weeds here in Utah. And so to see those guys, and I mean, just to see all of these little bips and bobs of the BYUs and the Utahs and all of these Highland guys and these United guys and the Harriman players, and just to see it all kind of coalesce to be able to help people see that what Utah can live up to in terms of its rugby potential is gratifying. Where we end up at against a team like LA that's got a bunch of former, Wallabies and Super Rugby players, which is very different from our model of domestic grassroots, bringing in younger, up-and-coming guys. We're going to do the exact same thing we did in 2009. We're going to hopefully burn the boats and just leave it all on the table and see what happens.
I can't wait to see it the next couple of weeks. Okay, so the Warriors have announced a 10,000-seat stadium as well in the next several years. Mm-hmm. That's a massive move. Yeah. That's going to be, the third biggest stadium, and if it's in Salt Lake County. I mean, you got Rice Eccles, you got Rio Tinto, and then the Utah Warriors. That's awesome.
Yeah, we're still committed to that concept. We haven't said a lot about it for a variety of reasons over the last 4 or 5 months, and candidly, that's a little bit on purpose. We're having to go through the process with a little bit of a finer tooth comb than what we first needed or thought. But it's still on the horizon. It's still something that's a priority to us. I mean, candidly, we sold out this last game of 4,500. We expect somewhere close on this LA game. And with the commercial team, and if the team continues to be successful, we believe that we'll be selling that place out next year, almost every home game, because it's a part of our community. It's a part of our identity. It's something that we want to give back to our rugby community and be a part of. And once people begin to get established and connected to the brand, fitting into a 10,000-seat stadium is going to be just the right size for us. But outside of that, from a business perspective, it makes sense for us to continue to help grow our sustainability and scalability as a business. Because as I said earlier, professional sports, especially a young startup league and a young startup team, you're not making lots of money. And you've got to figure out ways to try to decrease the blow for your partners and your investors as much as you can. And getting into a stadium, being able to control all your own revenue streams from that facility is something that's important to us and is vital to help us make sure that we can make this something that'll be here 30, 40 years from now.
Well, when you were 23, you called your shot, and it's happening, which is super exciting. It's super fun for me personally to be involved with this team that does have a handful of former BYU guys, of course, some Utah guys, Tanata Lauti and Danny Christensen and others that are doing great work as well. So it's pretty fun to see rugby grow in this community in a professional space that it hasn't occupied before. So hopefully it continues to go well, and in 10 or 15 years we can continue to see the growth and see where it goes. So it's been a fun journey, Kimball, and you and I still have a lot of journey left.
I hope so.
With the Utah Warriors, which is super exciting.
I hope so. And on that horizon, 10, 15 years, you're looking at a World Cup in the United States. You're looking at our stadium. You're looking at all sorts of things. I mean, rugby is the second largest sport in the world behind soccer. And it's going to take its rightful place here in the U.S. But the key thing for me and what I hope, BYU fans and everyone else comes to realize is that Utah should and can be, as soon as people think of Major League Rugby, we want people to think of Utah. That's what I hope and how we're building things. And again, I'm not trying to be braggadocious or anything like that with our MLR partners because I have tons and tons of respect for all of them. But there's just something different about the community here in Utah and what we can do because of that. And for me, it all started with BYU. It all started way back when I didn't know my head from my tail and trying out for the rugby team and, this school and everything that came from it, I owe a lot to. So I'm very grateful.
Okay, thanks, Kimball. We appreciate the time, man.
Well, thank you.